Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special episode of Creating During COVID. This podcast is going to be a little different from the content we usually produce, but we hope you enjoy it just the same. Today, we're going to be talking about Canadian theatre, how it's been affected by the pandemic, what the industry has done to adapt, and where we think it's heading after the events of this past year. I'm here today with Bryce Fletch and Dante Prince.
Hello.
As well as our two very special guests, Tanisha Taitt and Stephan Ermel.
Hello.
Hi there.
So, do you guys want to maybe give Stephan, Tanisha, do you want to give a brief overview of what you guys...
Introduce yourselves. Let the people know who you are.
Hi, my name is Tanisha Taitt. I am a theater artist and educator. I am the artistic director of Cahoots Theater in Toronto. I also am on the part-time faculties of George Brown Theater School, as well as Sheridan College in the Bachelor of Musical Theater Performance program. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about how we're all weathering this storm. And I'm especially happy to be here with members of my George Brown family, so that's really nice.
My name is Stephan Ermel. I'm the resident music director at Yes Theatre in Sudbury. And like Tanisha, I'm also working part-time at George Brown. I'm the vocal music instructor there. So yeah, I split my time between music education and music direction. And yeah, I'm excited like Tanisha to be here again with folks from George Brown and yeah, talk about this with all of you.
That's not the only thing you've done, Steph. You've also done, what did you do over this summer?
Oh yes, of course.
Yes.
Of course. All right. I guess that's why you.
The segue, the fluid segue.
That's right. Very nice.
That was seamless.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, so over the during the pandemic, yeah, I started up with a fellow creator, Jeanette Lambermont-Maury. We created the Quarantine Readers, which was kind of an ad hoc play reading group. We got together once a week with different actors, performers, theater creators to read a play.
Yeah, and then it definitely evolved over the course of its period.
Yeah, I mean, from the beginning, it was a really sort of informal group. It essentially started the way I think a lot of these things do over social media. Via Facebook, I just sort of reached out, just put a post online basically saying, hey, who wants to read a play with me? And the response was surprisingly big. So a lot of people jumped on board, were really excited. When I first started that, when I just sort of put that post out there, I didn't really think it would come to much of anything. I thought, we'll do this maybe once or twice and that'll be it. But the amount of people that were interested was quite surprising, and so I brought along. I asked Jeanette to help facilitate the process with me. So her and I chose scripts at first, and yeah, put together a group of actors every week. It was open to people to come and watch, which often folks did. But yeah, eventually that sort of became a little bit kind of larger than we expected, and I think a big part of that was after the BLM movement. I mean that's a whole story. I don't know if you want me to get into that now.
No, yeah, that we definitely wanted
right?
to touch on that. It's a big part, and especially when we talk about where Canadian theater is going to go after the pandemic, because I think the world around us has changed a lot, and we're ready to see that change on stage. I don't think we can go back to the normal that we experienced before the pandemic.
No, that feels for sure. Yeah. So do you want to should we get into that later on?
I was gonna have the different segments, but we can definitely we can begin to talk about that now. But I also want to talk before we do get into that. I think the first thing we should touch on is the initial shock back in March, how everything kind of shut down altogether. Tanisha, I think you can speak to that quite well, because for those of you who don't know, we attend a theater school in Toronto, Ontario, and Tanisha was set to direct one of the shows for third year in our program. And as we're all well aware, in March, everything kind of shut down and got canceled. And that was really hard for a lot of theater artists whose livelihoods depend on being in person on stage in front of a live audience. And no one was really prepared for that shock.
And then on top of that, there was the whole, on top of just your work as a director and educator, there's your entire, the theater company, you're the director of Cahoots Theater, had a whole upheaval and shift as well.
It was, I mean, I don't even know. March 13th is emblazoned in my mind. I wasn't about to direct. I was in the throes of directing.
Yes.
A third year production, one of their final two productions that were going to be like their graduating productions, and many of them had parents that had bought train tickets and plane tickets to come and see this show. And we were working super hard, and we had just finished blocking the show. We had just finished working in all the transitions, and we were about to do our first full run with all the transitions to move onto the stage out of the rehearsal studio. And so we were super excited because we were all feeling really good about the show. We were doing a Picnic at Hanging Rock, and we were rehearsing in rep. So we were rehearsing in rep with Sohail Parsa, who was rehearsing Rhinoceros with them as well. And I got a call from Sue, our program coordinator, on my off day saying you need to come in this afternoon. And I just had a feeling immediately that it was bad news. So I went in, and she said, this isn't good. Things are getting serious with this coronavirus thing, and you're not going to be able to do your run. And I don't know, it was shock but not surprise, but just the shock of being told that all of that work was for nothing was hard to wrap my head around. But what really, really broke my heart was she said, we have to go tell the kids. And that's when I just felt like, oh my God. So Sohail and Sue and I went to the studio where the kids were waiting. I'm sorry to call them kids. I call everybody kids who's like 28.
No.
They were waiting, and we walked in, and I think they could see from our faces that this was probably not going to be good news. So Sue told them that the run was not going to be happening. People began crying immediately. And then she said, but, Trent, the dean of the department, has agreed to let you do like one performance of each show. We're not going to have, the full set and everything, but you can do one performance of each show. So everyone was like, you've got to be kidding me. This is crazy. And then by the next day, that was gone too. So by March 14th, nothing was going forward. Graduation had been canceled. It was just brutal. It was absolutely brutal. And my heart broke for the third years because they had a particularly tough time because their first year was the year that we had a strike. So they had missed 8 weeks of school in first year and, had picked themselves back up from that only to have the end of their third year stolen. So it was very...
Well, their second year, they also lost a number of weeks.
Pardon?
Sorry, their second year, they also lost a number of weeks due to snowstorms. It seems like they lost time every year for some reason or another.
It was hard, and I was so proud of them, and it was very emotional because I had been their first scene study teacher in first year, and then didn't have them again until the last semester of third year, and we had been kind of waiting for this chance to be reunited, and so I was really excited to direct them and see how they'd grown. And the actual process of rehearsing was beautiful. I'm glad that we had that. I think that those were a wonderful few weeks, but to see the show then not happen was, it was very, very heart-wrenching.
Well, you talk about the date, March 13th, I believe, like that same night, and this is insane to think about now, everyone was so devastated. We had a giant party that night, which seems out of this world now, but we were all 3 years got together and we were talking about the pandemic because we had just been told that school, we would be off for a week. Nothing, we didn't know what was happening for a whole week. And so we were like, we'll be fine. They say this has a 2-week period. So if we're in a lockdown for 2 weeks, we could be able to go back to school, was the general consensus, and how wrong we were.
Mm-hmm.
I remember those early days. Like I remember one
Yeah.
lesson with your class in first year where I walked in and I sort of said, I think this is going to be really serious. I went in and I bought a bunch of canned goods at a grocery store, and like most of the class is just like laughing. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't know, man. I think it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was revving up. Like, in the days before, we'd started to hear more about COVID for sure. We had heard that it was no longer just the big thing in China and Italy, and that it had crossed the Atlantic, and that there were cases. But I think that everybody was hoping that, kind of like SARS and H1N1 and these things before us, that it would have a small little flare and it would go. But when I started to hear that people are advising you not to take transit, not to do this, not to do that, like I started taking cabs, and I started when cabs are expensive, not everybody can do that. So it was really, really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And when it all shut down, I was thinking, okay, they're saying 2 weeks, but it might be a month. It might be a month. Here we are, 10 and a half months later.
It might be a month.
10 and a half months later, with no immediate end in sight. I mean, it looks like it's going to be the better part of 2 years before this is.
Well, yeah, and that's why I think we wanted to do this podcast, because we wanted to talk about, because it's been, as you said, 10 months. In that time, theaters have been affected by the pandemic. They've had to close down because of the pandemic, but now we're also seeing how they're bouncing back and how the people are becoming resilient and adapting to their new situations, which I think is incredibly important. And a lot of people actually started working during the pandemic. Dante, if you want to talk about that a little bit, I remember you actually got an agent during the pandemic and started working, because not everything closed.
Right. Yeah. So the pandemic was sort of this time where you could either do absolutely nothing and no one would blame you, or you could, just try to find these little holes and little places where you could slip and slide into to create something for yourself. There was a time when there were a few places open just with restrictions, like film classes were still being done, but you had glass walls, and but it worked because they could just film you, and you could still be on camera and do the same sort of learning and things like that. And so, yeah, meetings were still sort of happening. I was lucky enough, I knew some people with the agency, and so they were able to get me meetings with them, and I was able to send them self-tapes and do sort of a in-person audition behind the glass in front of the camera, 6 feet apart. That was when people were still sort of kind of allowed to go outside. But yeah, I got pretty lucky before everything was shut down and everything was closed. And for me personally, it was a good time to get an agent, because there's little expenses, like you have to get headshots and stuff like that. And since there was no I wasn't spending money on transportation going to school every day, it was a good time for me to spend some money on some stuff. So getting headshots and things like that, getting the equipment I need to start doing self tapes and stuff, it was a good time. It was a good investment for me.
Well, I agree, but also I think you're kind of in the headspace that we talked about a little bit earlier, where there's this momentum we had. Everyone dealt with the pandemic differently, and for a lot of people, the way they needed, not the way they did, but the way they needed to deal with the pandemic is they needed to fully take a step back and say, I need to reevaluate, I need to take a break. And that's perfectly okay. But for a lot of people, they needed to adapt and keep the momentum that they were working towards. Otherwise, I think the pandemic would have been much worse than it was for them.
Well, don't get me wrong here. I spent maybe 3-4 months on my couch doing absolutely nothing before I realized that I was going to turn 20, and I didn't want to have nothing accomplished before I had turned 20. So I decided to start doing something, anything. But for me personally, I'd previously taken a year off after high school, where I also spent 2 months maybe doing nothing, and I looked around and I said, I'm not doing this again. So I had to do something, but it was, I don't blame anyone, or I don't fault anyone for taking any sort of step back or not having any sort of motivation,
Yeah. Well, when we actually ended up doing very similar things, but in a very different way. You took a year off. I dropped out of university. And but I did have that feeling of like, I spent my time doing nothing. I need to do something now. And that's how we ended up creating all of this. And that's why we're here today. So I think it worked out. Bryce, do you want to talk about the show that where you were maybe heading when March hit? Because
Yeah. March was a really weird time. I had been cast in the Canadian premiere of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. For those of you that don't know, it's like a part 7 kind of to the book series, the movie series, all about the trio, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, their kids, years and years later. I'd been cast about halfway through 2019, and then just kind of sat on it waiting for the announcement, which came out March 10th or 11th. The announcement went public. Yeah, the announcement went public on the Wednesday, and then the world got Ontario and Canada got shut down on the Friday, and it was weird. It was surreal. There were a lot of emotions going on that week for me. It just of like confusion and just being overwhelmed slightly, and for a number of weeks there was this idea of like, well, we're just kind of see what's going to happen. We're just going to kind of see what's going to happen. And I'm still very much, when it comes to like my role and my casting in that show, I'm still very much in a place like I think many other actors are, who are working in theater and had contracts lined up of, well, we're just waiting to see what's going to happen. I'm one of the privileged who the show isn't outright canceled. It's not canceled. It is still being postponed until theaters can be accessible and safe to enter again. But yeah, it was, I I don't know. I just kind of was at this weird place when everything got shut down. It's like, all right, theater's on pause for who knows how long, where I was just like, well, what's next? I was very much lost for a while of what's next, what to do now. And I still think I'm trying to navigate that, but it was, yeah, it's weird. I don't really know what else to say or how else to put it, but it was a little overwhelming and a little weird.
yeah, that's fine. I think it's an overwhelming and weird situation, We've never dealt with something like this before. And so it's weird now talking the pandemic in March and April of 2020 versus where we are now is completely different, because the world essentially shut down for a good couple weeks. Like, people were doing nothing was really happening. Now we're in a space where we've learned to work around it, but those early days were scared, and it was a new world. And that's why I think, Steph, you talk about the response you got when you put out your post of play readings. It's because everyone was so lost. We were like, what do we do? How do we keep art going? And you found a way to do that.
I think like all the stories highlight the thing that I was thinking about listening to all of your stories is that everything felt like it was changing minute to minute. Like March 13th is like, we'll do one presentation. March 14th, it's like everything is canceled. Theater companies are sort of like putting things on hold. They're looking at ways to try to still maintain what they've got going on. And every moment there's new information about like new cases, about new protocols, about new like, just everything is changing constantly, and it does feel like you're sort of spinning. And to have, I don't know, something that you can sort of latch onto that feels maybe like a goal that you can actually work towards, I think is very comforting in that kind of a situation. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And then if we fast forward a couple of months, we've gotten used to not gotten used. I don't think I can ever get used to it, but it's maybe a bit more familiar in our lives. We've learned how to work around it. And I believe it was in May that the large amount of Black Lives Matters protests begun to occur, and people were beginning to wake up to, and it was far too late, but we're beginning to wake up to the racism that is inherently in the theater industry. And you shifted your program accordingly. I thought you did some really cool things with how you decided to handle that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big learning moment for me and for Jeanette as well. We the, like I had said in the beginning, quarantine sprung up as this kind of ad hoc, very like improv, just like whoever wanted to be a part of this group could be a part of it. But what we didn't really realize, because again, that wasn't our focus at the time, and that was like I said, a humbling and a learning moment for me, was that there was a lack of safety in our space, a space that we thought that we had originally built for actors to feel open and safe to like come in and just create again, to find joy in just meeting with other artists and other theater creators and performers. There was a lack of safety because we hadn't put our focus on looking at who was a part of the group, the kinds of I guess the politics between certain members. We hadn't kind of factored that into what we were doing. We hadn't actually like come up with because we didn't realize that it at the time it was so fresh for us. We didn't realize that we needed to put in place certain policies, certain protocols to make sure that the space that we were creating was inclusive, was safe, was open for everybody, and that racist ideas were not going to be tolerated in the space that we were occupying. And I think one of the first things that we did was to have this. It was called Black Overtones. This reading, which we hoped, we wanted to center around Black artists, Black voices. And it was really important for Jeanette and I to decenter ourselves in that conversation. So up until that point, we had been really running, each of those readings. We'd been opening those readings. And it was important for us to sort of like remove ourselves and to give over that spotlight. So the first thing that we did was we asked two fellow artists, Crystal Lee, who is a production manager here in Toronto, and Kareem Vaude, who's also a artistic director or co-artistic director of Notorious Theater Company, and an actor, a recent graduate of George Brown. And the two of them worked really, really hard to put together a very special reading, not only a reading, but also a panel discussion afterwards, which Tanisha was really, we were really fortunate to bring her into that discussion. I felt it was a really interesting discussion because it kind of intersected student actors and what life is like as a young actor who is in school, particularly a BIPOC artist. And then we had all of these incredible professional artists, of which Tanisha was one, who were able to speak from their perspective, working in that field as an educator, and the ways that those spaces like quarantine have not put a focus or an emphasis on safety, inclusion, and have really failed to give voice to those artists. So yeah, it was a really, really interesting discussion. I'm sure Tanisha could speak a little bit more about the discussion itself. But yeah, I mean, I can say for me, it was a really humbling and really educational moment. So I was really happy about it.
It was it quickly became you created a space where BIPOC artists could go and experience a bit of community that they hadn't experienced. I know for one, there was a focus on Middle Eastern and South Asian participants that I got to participate in, and it was really cool to be in a space like that because I had never been in a space like that before. And Tanisha, I know you also did a lot of work. First of all, you've done a ton of work for Black directors and Black actors in the Canadian theater industry. You've given them a space where they can be themselves, but you also did more this quarantine with the Through the Black Door event, I believe it was called.
Yeah, well, first of all, that panel was really cool. I really, I really enjoyed that a lot. So many perspectives, all from Black artists, and some of whom were biracial Black artists, which also brought a different perspective to the conversation. I really, really loved it, and I've watched it a few times since because being in something and then watching it later is a very different experience. And I've also sent the link to many, many people. But yeah, I mean, that period of time from May onwards was super interesting because the death of George Floyd was nothing special in the sense that it was another shooting of an innocent, I mean, well, in this case, an asphyxiation, but another murder of an innocent Black person. That had been happening for years and years and years. It was nothing new. Those same words that he said that he couldn't breathe were the same words that Eric Garner said when he was killed in a chokehold by police. What was different was that the world was standing still for this, and it hadn't been standing still for any of the others. And so, because of COVID, because there was a lack of distraction, because people weren't running to their jobs every day and mostly were sitting in their houses on the internet, people were able to take in that murder differently and be impacted by it differently. And that is one of the few benefits of this time for me, is that the stillness that COVID caused in people's lives allowed them to take in BLM in a very different way. So I'm grateful for that. And in terms of what we did at Cahoots, Through the Black Door was something an initiative that I created as a community conversation because I knew how many Black folks were just traumatized by what was going on. Because there was a series of things that happened in very quick succession in May and June. Like there was George Floyd, but there was also Ahmaud Arbery, who was jogging and was chased by these two white people, father and son, who thought, I'm gonna kill that man. Like it was crazy. That's when the news about what had happened to Breonna Taylor was starting to really come to the fore. There was also that very insane situation that didn't end up in a killing of Chris Cooper, who was the bird watcher in the park, who had that other crazy woman, also with the last name Cooper, which is a play in and of itself.
Always looking at things through the theater lens.
Well, I mean, yeah, there are reasons why lots of Black people and white people have the same last names, and we won't get into that. But
whole other podcast.
To see Amy Cooper trying to threaten, this poor guy, Christian Cooper, I think was his name, who was literally bird watching and just asked her, "Can you please put your dog on a leash?" And for her to then to weaponize his race immediately and be like, don't make me call the cops on you. Knowing what that meant. It was full knowledge of what it meant to threaten a Black man with the police. It was just so deranged. It was so deranged. And so Black people had to watch all of this happen within a couple of weeks. And it was really, we were tired and pained and just wondered where it was going to stop, And then all the things happening over the last year with the various people that they call the Karens, where Black people were having the cops called on them for absolutely no reason. Like, you're having a barbecue, you're backing out of your garage, you're standing there, you're whatever. Like, I'm going to call the cops on you. People were just tired. And so I thought, I need to create a space for Black folks who are not just angry, but grieving, to talk. And so we had an evening for Black folks to come and just talk about what they were feeling, and it was really cathartic and beautiful, and lots of folks came out. Again, also a lot of mixed race folks who were talking about the simultaneous pain of being what they felt was oppressed and oppressor in the same body, and how hard that was for them. Which then led me to think, oh, that's another conversation. So then I created another evening called Mixtape, specifically for mixed race people to
Yeah,
attend.
I was a part of that one. And
Yeah, that was our most attended.
there's a lot of people who feel like they don't fit a certain definition and they have an identity crisis
Yeah.
every day. Who that could be, I don't know.
Whole other podcast.
Whole other podcast. We'll have
Whole
to
other
come back to
podcast.
that.
Whole other
It was,
podcast.
it was good, and we also had another one. We had a community conversation also for the Asian community, the East Asian community, who had been dealing with a lot of vitriol coming at them because of COVID, and being blamed for COVID, and people being assaulted and attacked, and all of this craziness. And I have friends who are Chinese, friends who are not Chinese but are visibly Asian, who were just being like told off, harassed on the street. It's because of you, and it's like it's because of you that the world.
Who are you?
I mean, absolute madness. So yeah, we tried to create spaces for people who were hurting.
Well, one of the things I thought was commendable about the spaces you create is we talk so much about people in places of power need to create these places for these artists. But a lot of the times what has happened in the past is that people in those positions of power or privilege create these spaces, but they are still the center of those spaces. They're like, look at this space that I have created for you.
Oh, oh,
Something was really good was that both Stephan and Tanisha, when they created spaces for different minorities, they made sure they weren't the ones running those events. And it's interesting to have stuff like that, because it's like, oh, now I actually do feel safe. I don't feel like I'm trying to explain to someone else what is going through and I want you to empathize with me. I'm communicating my experiences to someone who also may have had similar experiences and maybe can help deal with those experiences. And I thought I thought both projects were really well done, and it's why I wanted to talk to you guys today.
well, thanks. It's so important not to center yourself. Like, the thought of me leading Mixtape or Abrasions, which was the gathering for Asian people. We had another one called Color the Closet for queer people of color. I'm not gonna lead those things. I'm not. That's not my experience, so I'm not gonna lead those things. And what I think is really problematic in the theater industry right now, both in companies and in schools, is that you have people who are acknowledging finally, yeah, we have to make some major changes. We have to be way more inclusive, but it's still white puppet masters deciding out of the goodness of their hearts to let the Black folk and the indigenous folk and the Asian folk have opportunities. It's still this idea that we are at the mercy of white people's kindness. And I'm kind of done with that. Like, I'm really kind of done with that. There has to be, what we need is to have the people that are making decisions also be BIPOC people. We can't just always be knocking at the door and asking white folks to please let us in. And that's what's been happening for decades.
Yeah. Going back to your point about it's also in theater schools, a lot of theater is based around like these plays written by cis white men throughout history, and you don't really realize how much that affects you until you're taken out of that a little bit. I know a couple of our classmates, and maybe Dante, you can talk about this more because we were talking about it earlier. But a lot of our classmates, when Tanisha first started her class, she did either majority or mostly BIPOC playwrights and BIPOC stories. And that was such a different experience than what we were used to. It was refreshing, but it was also foreign in a way that it shouldn't have been foreign. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think we read like 24 plays in our class, and I believe it was, I think maybe Bang Bang and Seat Next to the King were the only two written by white people, and the other 22 were BIPOC writers. And I've always just been very committed to the fact that if I know that my students are only reading white people in every other class, that is not what they're doing in my class. And I'm also not a white educator, so I'm not coming with that lens. That's not where my primary interest lies.
Well, even those two plays that were written by white artists, they still weren't like heterosexual, or like they were still like of another identity other than the stereotypical cis het and white. I think you said Seat Next to the King was written by a queer artist, I believe, and I'm not sure about Bang Bang, but there was still some form of diversity brought in.
Bang Bang was written by Kat Sandler. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was really important to me. And both of those plays, written by white people who are friends of mine, deal with race quite explicitly. And I thought that the way that they explored race was so beautifully crafted that I wanted them in the syllabus.
Yeah, well, I'll say it was truly beautiful, getting to experience a scene study like that, and seeing, classmates get to experience a scene study like that, and watching them face their own stereotypes, that they had in their head, because I did get asked, how do I say this line? How do I do this? How do I say these things? If you know what I'm getting at, they didn't understand how to be a person of color when your whole class was about just be, and that there is no difference. And that is exactly the thing that I've been yearning for so long. I get so tired of seeing shows where there's Black people or there are people of color, sure, but they're, maybe three types. You see these three types of people in these shows. Black people can only be these three things, and I just needed to see something more. And that's what I think Canadian theater is heading towards. Where I think we're realizing that people of color aren't a monolith, and they aren't just one thing. They don't act like one thing. We're so diverse and so different, and we can be 1,000 different things, and thousands of different stories can be created through our lens.
I also just want to say that, I've been asked in the last 3 years to talk a lot on various panels, with various seminars.
Sorry, my bad.
I love you. It's fine. I will always do things for students. And, I just did a talk with Brock University a couple weeks ago about the way that I approach scene study, because apparently it's revolutionary, which to me is sad because I think it's basic. I really do. But the number of people who think it's revolutionary to have anyone speak a word in a classroom that was originally written for a character of a different color, there are a lot of people who feel that way. And I don't feel that way. I have always felt that the classroom is a place for empathy and exploration, and a place to stretch in a way that you cannot do professionally. But to really flex your acting muscles and your human muscles to experiment with the idea of what it is to walk in the shoes of someone who is radically different from yourself. And I think that's super valuable. So to me, as long as you're making common sense decisions about what you are asking students to do, it's not a huge deal. I mean, you have to use your brain. If I'm giving Bryce a scene from Kim's Convenience, I'm not going to pick the most Korean scene in the play for him to talk about his Korean experiences while being a visible white boy on the stage.
But I'm fluent in Korean. Didn't you know that?
But I can find several scenes where it's just you talking to your sister or you talking to your mom, and it's a family moment, right? And it shows that
Yeah,
despite the specificity of the culture, the universality of the situation. And that is
people being people.
that's how I do my stuff. And then I mean we all saw several of us saw, you know, the beautiful work that Danish did, a Malaysian actor playing Troy Maxon in Fences last year. It was stunning. It was stunning. He's not African American. Um, and I purposely, you know, then didn't give him a monologue where he's like, me as a black man, because that would have been weird. You have to use common sense and make the right choices. And on the flip side of the search for universality is the beauty of specificity. So I have spent, you know, from 2017 when I got hired to 2020, I had been waiting patiently for the year when I would have two black boys in my class. I'm gonna cry. And last year, when I got Dante and Rashawn and had the opportunity to do a scene from Top Dog Underdog, which I'd wanted to do forever, being able to do work that specific for two young black men to do a play that was written for them, not asking them to step in to George F. Walker or whatever yet again, meant the world to me. And they killed it. They killed it. And I think part of the reason why they killed it is not just because they're great actors, but because they were wearing skin that fit. And people don't understand what it is to wear skin that fits in theater school. Because so, you know, for BIPOC students, because they so often don't. So when people are coming up to me afterwards saying, "Oh my God, that was third year work," I'm like, that was black men getting to play black men.
I'll say it felt really good. It felt really good to be able to do that.
It was incredible.
Well, I think a lot of the way that diversity has been treated in theater schools has been treated wrong. Like, it's the wrong way to approach it. A lot of the approach in theater school is that your race does not matter, is what we're essentially taught for, I would say, 90% of our classes. It's, oh, it like Shakespeare goes beyond race. It's like, yeah, but we're still reading the words of this white man, and he's written from the perspective of a white man. Not to say that Shakespeare isn't valuable. I quite enjoy Shakespeare. My mother used to read it to me as a child, but uh, but there's so much more. The world is so beautiful, and there's so many stories about these unique individuals that just don't get told. And I think we're going to start seeing them get to be told as we move forward in Canadian theater after the pandemic. Look at that segue. 45 minutes. Okay. Yeah. We'll talk about this quickly, and then we'll probably wrap this up. So where do we think Canadian theater is heading post-pandemic, whether that be late 2021 or, God forbid, 2022?
The
was an open question.
The silence right now.
That was an open
I think the silence.
My youth is
keeping
keeping my mouth shut. My youth is keeping my mouth shut. I like to hear from the more seasoned artists here.
No, now you have to go first, Bryce.
I want to hear from you, Bryce. Where do
Yeah,
you think?
now you have to go first.
To be honest, I don't know. I think I'm in a place as a theater artist where I don't know if I'm a majority or a minority or just an individual here, but I'm still kind of mourning theater. I don't think I've really reached a place where I'm done mourning theater. And for me, mourning has been avoiding. It's been really avoiding theater and just doing everything else artistically I love that just doesn't involve the stage. And it's led to a lot of like pessimism, and it's led to a lot of just like negative focus when it comes to how other people are just trying to survive and explore and reinvent. Yeah, I don't really think I'm at that stage yet as an artist where I'm ready to look at what's next. I still think I'm trying to move past what was and letting that go. I would love to go back to as close to what was theater before pandemic as possible. And maybe that is possible again one day. I think I am ready to admit that that won't be a sooner than later situation.
The theater scene has to change.
But it has to change. It has to evolve both as a medium, how it's explored, both how it represents people, both the stories it tells. It needs to change in so many ways. And as a white dude, I have the privilege of being able to just like Like, I don't need to worry about whether or not my stories are told. They have been. I don't have to fight for that. So for me, when I worry about that, and it's a complete privilege to say this, is I'm worrying about the medium itself more so than the stories it tells. And because I'm at a place where I'm like, I'm ready to support and I'm on board with like, let's get other stories on the stage. So I'm ready to be a part of those conversations. I don't know, maybe I should be a part of leading them too. That's still something for me to navigate, but I've really loved listening to this conversation because it's kind of brought me out of my focus of like, well, what's theater going to be as a practice? And it's made me look more at the other side of the conversation where it's what's theater going to be as a storytelling device, which is super cool.
I'm I'm happy to jump in here just on a very small sort of window of this. I think what we kind of learned a little bit through doing quarantine from a I'm just going to speak to the technical side of things, because theater and film, because of the pandemic, are starting to converge in, I think, a very profound kind of way. And what we started realizing is that the actors who were coming into the space to perform needed to all of a sudden be thinking about costume. They had to be thinking about setting up the shot. They had to be thinking about lighting. And I think that as a whether you're an actor or whether you're a creator, a writer, a director, I think that, you know, if you know, we're not able to go back to the way that things were before, which I think is likely, then I think that performers are going to need to have an ability to put on other hats, technical hats, to be able to, like, you know, Dante, you were mentioning, like, I all of a sudden have this equipment that I never had before. I can suddenly, like, do a self-tape, which is something we had to do before, but I can do a self-tape, like, no problem. I've got, you know, a lot of the students that I'm working with have, like, those ring lights or, like, specific cameras. They've upped their quality, you know. They're thinking about, like, how can I get better sound? How can I get better lighting? How can I get better visuals? I think of Tanisha, you doing 21 Black Futures not too long ago. You had to come up with a shot list, you know what I mean, for the play that you're creating, right? Which is something I don't know if you've done it in. There's maybe a time way back when you might have had to do that, but not any time recently. And I think that these are the sorts of demands that are going to be placed on us. This multidisciplinary sort of approach. That's just one small window, that, you know, sort of one small thing that I see being affected here. That's what I see anyway.
I think that it's really interesting, some of the stuff that's happened in the last 10 months. I don't love all of it. I think that film and theater are two very different mediums, and you can't just pretend that one's the other.
No.
You can't just, like, film some people doing some theater and put that on the screen and think that that's going to compete with either live theater or great film. It doesn't compete with either. And so unless you happen to have the resources of, like, the National Theatre or Stratford, you end up with a lot of filmed theater that just doesn't work, unfortunately. You end up with a lot of filmed theater that just looks like that archival video that you make the day before your show closes.
Yeah.
That's not what you want to put out as a production for people to watch online. So resources are a big part of what's available in terms of being able to do more filmic approaches to theater. But I do love the fact that this virtual world has done wonders for accessibility, has allowed people who can't get to the theater to be able to sit down and watch shows while other people are also sitting down and watching them and not having to be the person that can't go. I appreciate that. I appreciate the way it's made the world a lot smaller, that I can be watching the same show that you're watching in two totally different places. I love the fact that meetings like this are happening and you have panelists calling in from all parts of the world. It's like what Zoom has done that I love is it's eliminated distance. It's made everybody equally distant. So whether you're in Mumbai or you're two streets away, we're talking and it's really cool. That I love. But I think we're gonna have to think long and hard about as a storytelling device, what does theater look like if coming back to the space means 25% capacities? You know, still having to think about doing shows that you can do in ways that are more distanced. That's really rough. Like, that's really rough. I mean, I'm thinking about my class next semester, and am I supposed to pick, 24 scenes in which people don't get closer than 6 feet? It's a very difficult and
That's what we're literally doing right now. Yeah.
yeah, it's a very difficult thing, and I don't know. I don't know if that's my jam. I think sometimes you have to really think about, is this, as the artist I am, is this the way that I can actually work and do my best work? So a lot of people are really thinking about just how do they fit in to these new structures.
That's why I think right now is searching. I think it's searching for, diverse people. It's searching for diverse stories, and we were moving to that anyways. But it's also searching for diverse ways to do it and to create and for people to enjoy and experience. I've recently I felt like things have just been opening up. Now there's been space, it feels like, for everybody. There's room for people. It's not a specific group, a specific crowd. If you've worked before, then you can get jobs. There's room. Everyone's searching.
It is weird the amount of like theater professionals I've met through the pandemic that I probably never would have met over in real life, just because everyone was so busy all the time. But it actually caused us to take a step back and then meet together as like a group. Maybe this is my cautious optimism, but I do one day see a world where COVID is gone and we're able to return to the theater. Might be a couple years, but who knows? I'm young. I can wait it out.
I'm not.
You're young, Tanisha. You're young. But for me, I think the way theater has changed, I don't want to go back to exactly what it was, because again, and one of the first things I think I ever told Tanisha in her class, and you might have forgotten this, but it stuck with me, was you asked us all what our favorite play was. And I said, I haven't really read that many plays. And so you asked me, you said, so why are you in theater school? Not as like a question to be like, so get out. It was a genuine question. I hope it wasn't a question to say get out. But it was a genuine question of, why haven't you read that many plays? I'm like, because I felt like there was a blueprint to a play that I knew, and it was very similar. So like there was nothing engaging in them to me. And you challenged that belief so much with the plays you had us read and the plays you had us perform, and it opened my eyes. Like suddenly I loved reading plays. I was like, there's so much out there, and not just the way the stories that are being told, but the way these stories are being told. Theater provides such an environment for storytelling that film and movies also have, but they do it in such different ways. Seat Next to the King is such a fantastic story. Like 50% of it happens at a urinal, and that's fantastic. Only in theater can that happen. So for me, I think the most important thing is that I want to start I want to continue as an actor and develop as an actor, but I now want to be the person creating stories like that and start Dante also. He made a little sign to me, but I want to start telling those stories on stage. And I think quarantine, for better or for worse, has given me the inspiration and the drive to start doing that. So I think this is a good place to wrap up. I've been given the 5-minute mark from Natalie. In a quick couple sentences for each of you, where do you want to go as artists or artistic directors, people who give voices to other artists? What direction would you like to head? Let's start with Tanisha.
I just want to say that for all of the COVID crazy, I think that now is a good time to be an independent theater artist, because I think that now is a time when we're open to exploration in a way that we haven't been before. Because before, we've always been very structured. We're in this promotion, production kind of cycle where you make something and then you promote it, then you make something new. And now people's eyes are really wide open to new possibilities. So form those interesting collectives and do those really interesting things, because the expectations are not the same as what they used to be. And so you can really dive into new ways of doing things. And smaller companies also have less to lose right now. It's been an interesting shift. Like right now, it's better in a lot of ways to be Cahoots than to be CanStage or Murphys or Soul Pepper, you know, because we don't have the same losses to incur because of a lack of box office. So be brave in artistic choices that you make and things that you do with collaborators and friends, because working in Zoom world at a time when we don't have to be thinking about bringing in bums and seats in the traditional way can provide actually a lot of opportunities for artistic growth.
I I think as an artist, after everything we talked about, even just my own thoughts coming into this conversation today, is I still feel like there's more to learn, and I think there's more risks to do new things that I can try, if that makes sense. Yeah, I think there's a lot more learning I'd like to do, just to try to help me grab my bearings as an artist about what to do next and where to go next.
Yeah, I think that that at the core of what I do and what I love is education. Whether I'm actually working as an educator, like at George Brown, or privately, or whether I'm music directing, it always feels like there's a part of me that is educating and like supporting the artists that I'm working with. And so I'm learning, and I've been really humbled over the last few months to have had an opportunity to learn from some incredible artists about how I can be a better support structure. And so I'm hoping that us as artists, myself like as a white cis male artist, that I can be putting into practice the things that I've learned, and that the theater companies that I'm working with, who have been, I suppose, let's say, talking a big game about making changes in the way that they're doing things, that they don't start slipping back on old habits, old ways of being, that those changes that we're talking about, when momentum starts picking up, when the time for reflection is sort of past and the time for action is upon us, that we actually are putting those things into practice that we're talking about changing. So that's what I'm trying to do with the work that I'm doing at George Brown right now. That's what I'm hoping to put into practice as I go back to music directing with theater companies. Yeah, that's my hope at this point.
Very selfishly, I like to say that I want to paint the town red and sort of create a whole lot of stuff that I truly yearn for, and that I know a lot of other people, want to see.
Nice. I think I'm in. Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat. I want to start creating. Yeah, and quarantine has given me time to create.
Do it. I support. And
I want to keep that train going. Thank you so much to our special guests, Tanisha Taitt and Stephan Ermel, for joining us today. It was
thank you.
Such a pleasure listening to you guys talk and your experiences. Thank you, Bryce and Dante, for also coming on. And thank you, Natalie, for producing and making sure everything's going good behind the scenes. If you guys liked this podcast, if you like the content that we talked about and would like to see more things along the lines similar in the future, please let us know. Leave a like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you liked, and if you'd like to see more of this, because I think there's definitely more conversations that need to be had across different aspects of the industry. And I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you.